The Gemini spacecraft was a very unique and special spacecraft, but Gemini 7 was even more special, and it all has to do with this switch here, and we're going to explain that today. Would you like to take an interactive virtual tour of this spacecraft, or this spacecraft, or this spacecraft, or even this spacecraft? Well, stay till the end and we'll show you how. In this issue of Spacecraft Guide, we are going back to the Gemini 7 spacecraft, and we are going to be specifically working on this switch here, the radar switch. And if you notice, it says transponder on the top. Well, that is because this was a special ship. There's a whole story of why this spacecraft had a transponder on it instead of a radar switch. And for our Patreon paying subscribers, we're going to go into that story. But for the rest of you, we're going to go over the radar switch. And when you click on it, it takes you to the Gemini radar switch. And what this is this switch powers the radar system when it's on standby. Those systems which the radar is interfaced are energized. A time delay of 60 seconds is allowed for warm-up prior to positioning the radar switch to on. Now that is, like I said, to get the system all warmed up, because if you put a surge of electricity through it, you might break something. So that's what that standby switch is for. When it's turned on, the radar commences a transmission of 1,528 megacycles. That number is going to be important. The transmitted interrogation signal has a pulse width of 1 microsecond, a pulse repetition of 250 pulses per second for radars in spacecraft 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. Now we're dealing with 7 here, so that's going to have 250. And then in the others, it's going to have 240. The transponder has a peak power of 1,150 watts. That's a lot of power. That's why you had to warm it up in standby right up here, or right here. So the standby, with that many watts, you could really do a lot of damage to the system. So you needed it to warm up. And another thing we want to look here is for the radar. The radar is working on this frequency, and it's sending out a pulse at 250 pulses per second for the radars. Now that is actually going to go out and find the other part of the system, which is the other spacecraft, the Agea, and that was going to send a pulse back, and that is going to use a transponder on the Agea to send it back. Now that is how that's how they located it, is they would put on this frequency and then they would point an antenna, and then as the pulse got stronger, and the radar system would notice that and then calculate what it took to get to that strong pulse. So that is how the Gemini radar switch worked. Now for our Patreon subscribers, we're going to go into the schematics, and we're going to describe a little bit more on how the system works using the schematics. So if you are a Patreon subscriber and you click on schematics, that's all for this week. If you would like to use this interactive virtual reality exhibit on the command module, the lunar module, and the surface of the moon, just go to our Patreon page and the link will be down below.